Episode 690. Book Talk begins at 15 minutes and 55 seconds. Cranford begins with episode 679. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 690, Chess Pieces. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by our marvelous patrons, channel members, and premium members at craftlit.com/premium. And this week we would like to highlight Donna Moore, Nina, Deborah Bennett, Julie, and Jennifer Gordon. Thank you so much. We could not do this without you. Well, hello. How are you? I'm okay today. I'm recording. I didn't know if I was going to make it. Computers are dying everywhere. All sorts of things are happening that are not helpful right now. But I really wanted to get this in the bag so that you could hear it this week, because this chapter is an important chess piece moving chapter. And it's also, as you would expect, rather funny. But I also had a bunch of links for you, and happily, a bunch of these links are coming from you. I'm going to start with the ones that are just me first, and then I'm going to get to the good stuff from you guys. My tea today is Bookshop Blend White. This is a white tea. It does have caffeine. Just because it's a white tea does not mean it is caffeine-free. Heather learned recently. And we are getting very, very close to you knowing why I am paying so much attention to tea during this book. And we will have that episode. It'll be a bonus episode of me and Andy Hayes from Plum Deluxe Tea answering, if not all of your tea questions that have been burning inside of you all these years, at least all of the questions that have been burning inside of me all these years. So I hope that's fun for you too. I sure learned a lot. Anyway, this is white tea, which you will learn listening to Andy Hayes. You will find out why that still has caffeine in it. Cinnamon, apple pieces, and they are so good. Orange and black currant essence. As I think I've said before, I cannot get enough black currant in my life. That and bergamot. They're just my favorites. And don't forget, if you haven't ever been into tea before, but you are, tea curious, go to their website. You can get there quickly at bit.ly/craftlit-PDTEA for Plum Deluxe Tea. From there, I think that's under the shop. That link takes you to the page with the CraftLit discount on it and my list of what teas I have been drinking from Plum Deluxe because I love it. But I think if you go to the shop or search drop down, somewhere in that area is the tea test. I kind of knew what kind of teas I liked, but I still took the test and it came out with the teas that I like. So I guess that's a good test. So there was that. The other thing is, don't forget, this is the last day second to the last day that you're going to be able to enter into the raffle for our foundation paper piecing donation from Erin. There's the Jane Austen pattern, there's a Sherlock Holmes pattern, and there's a lovely girl lying in front of warm, cozy scene reading a book pattern. And then there's the book tracker pattern, and that's free. And we link out to all of that in the show notes for you so you can take a look. And we have the pictures of the actual patterns that Erin has donated to us as well. 3 people are going to win. So go ahead and enter. All right. Andrew, my husband, Andrew, who has read poetry with us on CraftLit, who writes a post on Substack every week that is really read quite broadly. It's an interesting cross-section of people who are following him now, including one name that you might know, and that is Benjamin Dreyer, who wrote Dreyer's English. This guy's really cool. His book, Dreyer's English, is not dry at all, nor is he dry. And Andrew had written a post about AI and his interactions with AI, which have been quite interesting. You could imagine somebody who is quite a poetic writer when he is just writing for himself instead of for business. He has cultivated very poetic AI. It is interesting. And so Andrew had written a post. Benjamin Dreyer had seen it and commented on it and tagged it and shared it. And Andrew went and wrote on his post on his Substack about Andrew's post. So I am linking out to both of those. If you are freaked out by AI, there are some things to remember in brief. Garbage in, garbage out, which is what I learned over the last 19 years is true of audio. If my input is garbage, there is no way to make the audio better. So just like with algorithms on YouTube or even Google searches, your system is going to learn what you're looking for. So if you are looking for hateful things, you will be fed hateful things. If you are conversating with AI and you never check it for accuracy and you blithely take everything that it says as gospel truth and you never actually train it to, I need you to think like a scholar. I need all of the citations to be accurate. Accuracy over fluency is what actually Andrew's AI told him to call for whenever he needed detailed and accurate citations and quotations, which I thought was very interesting. Anyway, you can read more about it. It is not AI bashing. It is also not AI, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. This is both the cautionary tale, but also kind of a realistic look at, okay, AI's here. We better know how to interact with it because we're not going to get away from it anytime soon. Unless there's an EMP, which there could be. The world is very interesting right now. AI is going to be around. So there is that. Other piece of news, CraftLit is now on Audible. It is a long, stupid story about why CraftLit hasn't been on Audible. The short piece that you need to know is CraftLit should be on Audible now. Please check if you have a chance, if you visit Audible anytime in the near future, and let me know if you can find it, /how hard, /how easy it is to find it. Because again, my computer knows me, and so it remembers what I have looked at. So if I try and go find CraftLit on Audible, it's going to take me through the back way, through the ACX audio voiceover recording, audiobook recording side of things. So it would be hard. Anyway, let me know. If you are looking for something to make you feel better about the world, I highly recommend Jon Stewart and Trevor Noah. If you've never read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, really, truly listen to it. He pronounces all the words that you don't know how to pronounce because they have exclamation points in them and you can't do that thing. And it's just amazing. He speaks many, many languages and he does it all in reading his book. But he is also fascinating and super crazy smart. He is our people. He likes to go for the joke, but he also likes to know the depth of why it's a joke and what made it funny and what makes it funny. And they actually talk about things like that in this conversation. It's like a 2-hour conversation. There is no reason to watch it. It was playing on my YouTube feed. I was sewing. I didn't watch it at all. I just listened to them. Charming, lovely, totally made me feel better about the universe. And had some really interesting, everybody has their moments where we're like, oh my gosh, social media is, because I do say that myself all the time, including the me. It's a drag. Some people call it the inspitification of the internet, except they don't say spit. And yeah, once people realized they could make money off of the internet and social media, that was the end of the internet that we started building CraftLit on. So they have some very, very interesting things to talk about on that front that were unexpected. Them being social figures who are constantly shared and reshared and edited down and clipped and cut and taken out of context. They have some very, very interesting things to say about it that actually all the kids need to pay attention to as well. It might make their lives a little bit easier to see what these two grown-ups who are also affected by all of this have to say. The other post that was not so happy but was fascinating was Jameella Jamil. If you watched The Good Place, you remember her. Gorgeous, funny, crazy smart. She is out there all the time raising money for good causes and commenting, and she is a beautiful writer. If you've never read her writing before, you're in for a treat, because you may have seen in the New York Times Magazine, I don't get the Sunday Times anymore, so I didn't see this. There was a story on her that was written by the New York Times travel writer. I don't know why she would have been assigned to Jameella Jamil, but even though they had a very charming conversation, Jameella Jamil posted a screenshot of the opening of this article. It did not look like they had a charming conversation. There was a lot of character assassination. And Jameella Jamil doesn't, in her article, she doesn't whine about that. But she does start to ask questions like, why is it that this only happens to her when women are interviewing her? What is it about women that won't allow them to even be honest? Not like praise, but just be, people do their best. You do the best with what you've got. Here's what they're doing. Is it good? Yes. Is it always perfect? No. Here's some place where it fell short. Not here's some place where she was unpleasant. You know what I mean? It is very, very well written. She does get very angry in the last third, and then she kind of reins it in and brings it back. But wow. Yeah, it's well worth a read. And I've got a link to that Substack and you don't have to pay for it. Normally her stuff is behind a paywall. This is not. She made this one free so everybody could read it. I needed to tell you that. Don't forget to send us your crafty videos. We've got a video today from listener Steph. We're so excited. So yeah, we'll have a link again in the show notes so that you can get those videos to us via a Google form. If you have, things you want to link out to, or links or shop names that you want to have on the screen while we play your video, please do. And of course, that for people who are not watching on YouTube, that's what we're doing when we do the book audio, is we have a visual of some sort on the screen, just to have a visual on the screen. But it's kind of nice to see somebody doing something crafty while you're listening to the book. Here we go with the cool stuff that got sent in this week. Listener Margaret had just read this book about the Porter sisters when their books were mentioned in Cranford a couple weeks back. So we have another zeitgeist moment. These are the sisters who wrote the books Thaddeus of Warsaw and the Hungarian Brothers, Don Sebastian, the young Proctor of San Sebastian. They wrote a lot of very highfalutin sounding books, but they turn out to be quite interesting. Margaret said it was not an easy read. But it was a very well-researched book and fascinating about these sister novelists. And the book is called, in fact, Sister Novelists. So yeah, what about that? The timing that's pretty cool. Then over on the Discord server, listener JayKay wrote, I just listened to the podcast Haptic and Hue, Tales of Textiles. I'm assuming haptic because textiles have a texture, have a touch, have a feel to them, and hue because colors. I thought it was a pretty clever title for a podcast. The June 4th, 2025 episode this year is on the Witches of Scotland, and it's about how a new tartan became a living memorial. She wrote, I thought the CraftLit people would be interested. It's about two women in Scotland, a professor and a lawyer, who studied the appalling episode in Scottish history. And, it happened everywhere, all the witch burnings. Mostly women who were executed and often burned for being witches. It was a bad time to be a chick. Scotland, however, I did not know this, executed a higher number of women than other countries did during that time. It was about 173 years of time that witch burnings were happening, or witch persecutions were happening. So these two women, the professor and the lawyer, they wanted to come up with a way to create a memorial to those women, to those people who got burnt. And so they created a tartan. It is crowdfunded. And yeah, I was entranced. I haven't listened to the episode yet because I've been preparing for this. I plan to today when I go to the pool because it is hot here. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it's probably hot where you are too. And then Maia also shared BBC podcast about witches. There's an episode that talks about the same thing. And then Lily M also shared another podcast episode on the same topic. So we now have 3 different takes on this particular memorial that was done for the women who were killed in the witch burnings, the witch persecutions. And I just love the idea that they crowdsourced a tartan. That's just cool. Yay, textile people. Makes me proud. All right. Last week was chapter 11, Samuel Brown. That was the end of one set of chess moves. This episode today, chapter 12, is the beginning of another set of chess moves. Actually, this one is almost entirely self-contained. There are pieces of what goes on here that will matter later, but it's not so much like an introduction to a section, the way that we had Signor Brunoni was kind of a 3-chapter arc. This is kind of intermezzo. And then we will go on with the last major arc of the story, which is when the tea comes in. So today's a pretty easy chapter. It's pretty light. It is also pretty funny. And just picture Imelda Staunton as Miss Pole. There are times when you can absolutely tell that Imelda Staunton read this book several times because she does actual physical actions that are described in this book. She does them in the series. She's a reader. I know that somewhere in CraftLit history, and for all I know, it could be this book, there was a mention about the Pickwick Papers, and my brain is misfiring right now because I know we talked about the Pickwick Papers because Captain Brown was reading them, but I don't think it was this joke. There's a scene in chapter 32 of the Pickwick Papers where everybody is having their own conversation at the same time, so nobody is making sense to anybody else. They talk about it as singing, like everybody is singing to their own tune all at the same time, and it is not going to help people understand what's going on, but it is very funny. There is a reference to the Veiled Prophet in Lalla Rookh. This is a verse poem. So obviously if it's verse, it's a verse poem, but its sections are separated by prose text. So it's an interesting construction. It was written by Thomas More, not that one, not the one you're thinking of. This was one who lived from 1799 to 1852. And he wrote these tales. It was kind of like his Arabian Nights-ish, so kind of orientalized, exoticized tales. If you don't know what I mean with orientalized, is it Edward Said's book, Orientalism? I'll put it in the show notes regardless. I'll say it correctly in the show notes. But he goes a long way to explaining why this kind of thing was happening now in history, why this kind of exotification was going on. Anyway, the first tale in this particular set of poems was The Veiled Prophet of Khorassan, where the beautiful Zelika is lured to a harem and then later killed by mistake by her lover. The Veiled Prophet is Lalla Rookh, Llarookhh. Rowland's Kalydor is a skin tonic that was for sale at the time, and it had almond oil base. That's all. Peruvian bonds. Okay. It gets complicated. It sounds way more complicated than it is in this annotation. I'm going to read you what the annotation says, and then I'm going to explain why I read the whole thing. Bonds, Peruvian bonds. Bonds are issued by governments or companies wishing to raise money. So U.S. Treasury bonds are our bonds. The implication of the name of a remote country in South America being mentioned, Peruvian bonds, is implying that they are risky. They're distant, they're remote. You can't possibly know everything you need to know about the people who are putting the bonds out on offer. And so it's a risky thing. If you haven't ever heard of the South Sea bubble, and I don't know how, but I hadn't until, like maybe 8 years ago. Aaron showed me an extra history video series on the South Sea bubble. That is the series that started their inside joke that they have now t-shirts on saying it was Walpole's fault, because Walpole, who we have talked about on this podcast, he was involved in and around the South Sea bubble thing. It was basically a very unstable, not quite a pyramid scheme, but it was an unstable money-making scheme. And as all bubbles do, eventually burst. So if you want to learn a little bit about history that you may not have heard of before, and maybe you do know everything there is to know about it, I sure didn't. I'm putting a link out to that particular video series because they do a marvelous job. I have been very, very impressed by the kinds of things that Extra Credits History does, in part because they do to history what we do here. They're making sure that you understand things so that you can get sub-references and jokes. And they do a marvelous job. You're going to hear the word coarse being referred to, COARSE. There's going to be a comment about people having an understanding between each other. Implications of having an understanding are fairly broad. And because they're fairly broad, that word is determined to have been a coarse word choice. It's a little edgy. It's a little beyond where we want to go. Kind of like with Lucille Ball. And on her show, they couldn't say the word pregnant. She was with child, she was expecting, but they couldn't say pregnant. That word was too coarse. It's one of those moments. There's a reference to bread and cheese and beer. So this turns out to be a Gaskell thing. This is in 1866, she writes Wives and Daughters, so fully 10 years after this. And she has a character, Dr. Gibson. This is his preferred meal, bread and cheese and beer. However, that particular diet is frowned upon by his genteel wife. And of course, we like our genteel women here. When he tells her that bread and cheese is the chief of my diet, she responds, I really cannot allow cheese to come beyond the kitchen. Really, Mr. Gibson, it is astonishing to compare your appearance and manners with your taste. You look like such a gentleman. Thank you, Elizabeth Gaskell. Tibby Fowler. Tibby Fowler is a poem by Robert Burns. Robert Burns was 1756 to 1796. In this poem, all you really need to know is that Tibby Fowler has lots and lots of suitors. And it's only at the very end of the ballad that you find out that the reason she has so many suitors is because they are attracted to her money and not so much her. There's a phrase, I put in my wonder. I put in my wonder. It just means I spoke up and said out loud what I was wondering at the time. So I put mine in there into the pot of conversation that was happening. There's going to be a reference to her order. This is going to be said about Lady Glenmire, and it is not being used nicely. She probably is more concerned with her order, with her rank in society, based on the fact that they still believe that her family is related to the Tyrrells, who are of dubious fame. And as we know, there is exactly zero proof that she actually gives a flying jump at a rolling donut about any of this. She seems to be the most unaffected person that we've seen so far. Even during the panic, she was pretty solid. So yeah, that's other people making their own issues with money and societal rank prominent, not her doing it. And then the last note today, I love this. There's going to be a reference to the Queen of Spain's legs. Okay, I had no idea what was going on with this. Here it is. This is probably a completely apocryphal story, but this is the story. There is a story about the future bride of a king of Spain And it was somewhere around the 16th century. So think Renaissance, think about when Queen Elizabeth was first given silk stockings, knitted stockings. It was kind of revelatory. So we're right after that. She was traveling through Spain to meet her husband-to-be, and she reached a town that was very famous for stocking making and was presented with a very expensive pair of stockings. This was regarded by her courtiers as a breach of decorum because your women's legs were supposed to be concealed under the rather voluminous dresses. And so actually giving her something to clothe the legs underneath the skirts, that was taking it a step too far. And the courtier is said to have remarked, as he refused the gift, "The Queen of Spain has no legs." So, okay, the Queen of Spain's legs do not exist because we're being polite. I love it. All right, that is everything I think you may need for this chapter, and let's listen. If you are not listening to Noel Badrian read for us, you can skip ahead to 47 minutes and 21 seconds.
Chapter 12 of Cranford by Elizabeth Gaskell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Noel Badrian. Engaged to be married. Was the poor Peter of Cranford the Aga Jenkins of Chundarabad dad, or was he not? As somebody says, that was the question. In my own home, whenever people had nothing else to do, they blamed me for want of discretion. Indiscretion was my bugbear fault. Everybody has a bugbear fault, a sort of standing characteristic, a pièce de résistance for their friends to cut at, and in general they cut and come again. I was tired of being called indiscreet and incautious, and I determined for once to prove myself a model of prudence and wisdom. I would not even hint my suspicions respecting the Aga. I would collect evidence and carry it home to lay before my father, as the family friend of the two Miss Jenkinses. In my search after facts, I was often reminded of a description my father had once given of a ladies' committee that he had had to preside over. He said he could not help thinking of a passage in Dickens, which spoke of a chorus in which every man took the tune he knew best and sang it to his own satisfaction. So at this charitable committee, every lady took the subject uppermost in her mind and talked about it to her own great contentment, but not much to the advancement of the subject they had met to discuss. But even that committee could have been nothing to the Cranford ladies when I attempted to gain some clear and definite information as to poor Peter's height, appearance, and when and where he was seen and heard of last. For instance, I remembered asking Miss Pole, and I thought the question was very opportune, for I put it when I met her at a call at Mrs. Forrester's, and both the ladies had known Peter, and I imagined that they might refresh each other's memories. I asked Miss Pole what was the very last thing they had ever heard about him, and then she named the absurd report to which I have alluded, about his having been elected Great Llama of Tibet, and this was a signal for each lady to go off on her separate idea. Mrs. Forrester's start was made on the Veiled Prophet in Lalla Rookh, whether I thought he was meant for the Great Llama, though Peter was not so ugly. Indeed, rather handsome, if he had not been freckled. I was thankful to see her double upon Peter, but in a moment the delusive lady was off upon Rowland's Kalydor, and the merits of cosmetics and hair oils in general, and holding forth so fluently that I turned to listen to Miss Pole, who, through the llamas, the beasts of burden, had gone to Peruvian bonds, and the share market, and her poor opinion of joint stock banks in general, and of that one in particular, in which Miss Matty's money was invested. In vain I put in, when was it, in what year was it, that you heard that Mr. Peter was the Great Llama? They only joined issue to dispute whether llamas were carnivorous animals or not, in which dispute they were not quite on fair grounds, as Mrs. Forrester, after they had grown warm and cool again, acknowledged that she always confused carnivorous and graminivorous together, just as she did horizontal and perpendicular. But then she apologized for it very prettily by saying that in her day the only use people made of 4-syllabled words was to teach how they should be spelt. The only fact I gained from this conversation was that certainly Peter had last been heard of in India, or that neighbourhood, and that this scanty intelligence of his whereabouts had reached Cranford in the year when Miss Pole had bought her Indian muslin gown, long since worn out. We washed it and mended it and traced its decline and fall into a window blind before we could go on. And in a year when Wombwell came to Cranford, because Miss Matty had wanted to see an elephant in order that she might the better imagine Peter riding on one, and had seen a boa constrictor too, which was more than she wished to imagine in her fancy pictures of Peter's locality, and in a year when Miss Jenkins had learned some piece of poetry off by heart, and used to say at all the Cranford parties how Peter was surveying mankind from China to Peru, which everybody had thought very grand and rather appropriate, because India was between China and Peru, if you took care to turn the globe to the left instead of the right. I suppose all these inquiries of mine, and the consequent curiosity excited in the minds of my friends, made us blind and deaf to what was going on around us. It seemed to me as if the sun rose and shone, and as if the rain rained on Cranford just as usual, and I did not notice any sign of the times that could be considered as a prognostic of any uncommon event. And, to the best of my belief, not only Miss Matty and Mrs. Forrester, but even Miss Pole herself, whom we looked upon as a kind of prophetess, from the knack she had of foreseeing things before they came to pass, although she did not like to disturb her friends by telling them her foreknowledge, even Miss Pole herself was breathless with astonishment when she came to tell us of the astounding piece of news. But I must recover myself. The contemplation of it, even at this distance of time, has taken away my breath and my grammar, and unless I subdue my emotion, my spelling will go too. We were sitting, Miss Matty and I, much as usual, she in the blue chintz easy-chair with her back to the light and her knitting in her hand, I reading aloud the St. James's Chronicle. A few minutes more, and we should have gone to make the little alterations in dress usual before calling time, 12 o'clock in Cranford. I remember the scene and the date well. We had been talking of the signor's rapid recovery since the warmer weather had set in, and praising Mr. Hoggins's skill, and lamenting his want of refinement and manner. It seems a curious coincidence that this should have been our subject, but so it was. When a knock was heard, a caller's knock, 3 distinct raps, and we were flying, that is to say, Miss Matty could not walk very fast, having had a touch of rheumatism, to our rooms to change cap and collars, when Miss Pole arrested us by calling out as she came up the stairs, "Don't go, I can't wait, it is not 12, I know, but never mind your dress, I must speak to you." We did our best to look as if it was not we who had made the hurried movement, the sound of which she had heard, for, of course, we did not like to have it supposed that we had any old clothes that it was convenient to wear out in the sanctuary of home, as Miss Jenkins once prettily called the back parlour where she was tying up preserves. So we threw our gentility with double force into our manners, and very genteel we were for 2 minutes, while Miss Pole recovered breath, and excited our curiosity strongly by lifting up her hands in amazement and bringing them down in silence, as if what she had to say was too big for words, and could only be expressed by pantomime. "What do you think, Miss Matty? What do you think? Lady Glenmire is to marry? "is to be married, I mean, Lady Glenmire. Mr. Hoggins. Mr. Hoggins is going to marry Lady Glenmire." "Marry?" said we. "Marry? Madness." "Marry," said Miss Pole, with the decision that belonged to her character. "I said marry, as you do, and I also said, what a fool my lady is going to make of herself. I could have said madness, but I controlled myself, for it was in a public shop that I heard of it. Where feminine delicacy has gone to, I don't know. You and I, Miss Matty, would have been ashamed to have known that our marriage was spoken of in a grocer's shop in the hearing of shopmen." "But," said Miss Matty, sighing as one recovering from a blow, "perhaps it is not true. Perhaps we are doing her injustice." "No," said Miss Pole, "I have taken care to ascertain that. I went straight to Mrs. Fitzadam to borrow a cookery book which I knew she had, and I introduced my congratulations apropos of the difficulty gentlemen must have in housekeeping, and Mrs. Fitzadam bridled up and said that she believed it was true, though how and where I could have heard it she did not know. She said her brother and Lady Glenmire had come to an understanding at last." Understanding? Such a coarse word, but my lady will have to come down to many a want of refinement. I have reason to believe Mr. Hoggins sups on bread and cheese and beer every night. "Marry," said Miss Matty once again. "Well, I never thought of it. Two people that we know going to be married. It's coming very near." "So near that my heart stopped beating when I heard of it, while you might have counted 12, said Miss Pole. "One does not know whose turn may come next. Here in Cranford, poor Lady Glenmire might have thought herself safe," said Miss Matty, with a gentle pity in her tones. "Bah," said Miss Pole, with a toss of her head. "Don't you remember poor dear Captain Brown's song, Tibby Fowler, and the line, set her on the tin-tock tap, the wind will blaw a man till her? That was because Tibby Fowler was rich, I think. Well, there is a kind of attraction about Lady Glenmire that I, for one, should be ashamed to have." I put in my wonder. "But how can she have fancied Mr. Hoggins? I am not surprised that Mr. Hoggins liked her." "Oh, I don't know. Mr. Hoggins is rich and very pleasant looking," said Miss Matty, "and very good tempered and kind-hearted." "She has married for an establishment, that's it. I suppose she takes the surgery with it," said Miss Pole, with a dry little laugh at her own joke. But like many people who think they have made a severe and sarcastic speech, which yet is clever of its kind, she began to relax in her grimness from the moment when she made this allusion to the surgery, and we turned to speculate on the way in which Mrs. Jameson would receive the news. The person whom she had left in charge of her house to keep off followers from her maids, to set up a follower of her own, and that follower a man whom Mrs. Jameson had tabooed as vulgar and inadmissible to Cranford society, not merely on account of his name, but because of his voice, his complexion, his boots smelling of the stable, and himself smelling of drugs. Had he ever been to see Lady Glenmire at Mrs. Jameson's? Chloride of lime would not purify the house in its owner's estimation if he had. Or had their interviews been confined to the occasional meeting in the chamber of the poor sick conjurer, to whom, with all our sense of the mésalliance, we could not help allowing that they had both been exceedingly kind? And now it turned out that a servant of Mrs. Jameson's had been ill, and Mr. Hoggins had been attending her for some weeks. So the wolf had got into the fold, and now he was carrying off the shepherdess. What would Mrs. Jameson say? We looked into the darkness of futurity as a child gazes after a rocket up in the cloudy sky, full of wondering expectation of the rattle, the discharge, and the brilliant shower of sparks and light. Then we brought ourselves down to earth and the present time by questioning each other, being all equally ignorant and all equally without the slightest data to build any conclusions upon, as to when it would take place, where, how much a year Mr. Hoggins had, whether she would drop her title, and how Martha and the other correct servants in Cranford would ever be brought to announce a married couple as Lady Glenmire and Mr. Hoggins. But would they be visited? Would Mrs. Jameson let us? Or must we choose between the Honourable Mrs. Jameson and the degraded Lady Glenmire? We all liked Lady Glenmire the best. She was bright and kind and sociable and agreeable, and Mrs. Jameson was dull and inert and pompous and tiresome. But we had acknowledged the sway of the latter so long that it seemed like a kind of disloyalty now even to meditate disobedience to the prohibition we anticipated. Mrs. Forrester surprised us in our darned caps and patched collars, and we forgot all about them in our eagerness to see how she would bear the information which we honourably left to Miss Pole to impart, although, if we had been inclined to take unfair advantage, we might have rushed in ourselves, for she had a most out-of-place fit of coughing for 5 minutes after Mrs. Forrester entered the room. I shall never forget the imploring expression of her eyes as she looked at us over her pocket-handkerchief. They said, as plain as words could speak, "Don't let nature deprive me of the treasure which is mine, although for a time I can make no use of it." And we did not. Mrs. Forrester's surprise was equal to ours, and her sense of injury rather greater, because she had to feel for her order, and saw more fully than we could do how such conduct brought stains on the aristocracy. When she and Miss Pole left us, we endeavoured to subside into calmness, but Miss Matty was really upset by the intelligence she had heard. She reckoned it up, and it was more than 15 years since she had heard of any of her acquaintance going to be married, with the one exception of Miss Jessie Brown, and, as she said, it gave her quite a shock, and made her feel as if she could not think what would happen next. I don't know whether it is a fancy of mine or a real fact, but I have noticed that, just after the announcement of an engagement in any set, the unmarried ladies in that set flutter out in an unusual gaiety and newness of dress, as much as to say, in a tacit and unconscious manner, "We also are spinsters." Miss Matty and Miss Pole talked and thought more about bonnets, gowns, caps and shawls during the fortnight that succeeded this call than I had known them do for years before. But it might be the spring weather, for it was a warm and pleasant March, and merinos and beavers and woolen materials of all sorts were but ungracious receptacles of the bright sun's glancing rays. It had not been Lady Glenmire's dress that had won Mr. Hoggins's heart, for she went about on her errands of kindness more shabby than ever, although in the hurried glimpses I caught of her at church or elsewhere, she appeared rather to shun meeting any of her friends. Her face seemed to have almost something of the flush of youth in it. Her lips looked redder and more trembling full than in their old compressed state, and her eyes dwelt on all things with a lingering light, as if she were learning to love Cranford and its belongings. Mr. Hoggins looked broad and radiant, and creaked up the middle aisle at church in a brand new pair of top boots, an audible as well as visible sign of his proposed change of state, for the tradition went that the boots he had worn till now were the identical pair in which he first set out on his rounds in Cranford 25 years ago. Only they had been new-pieced, high and low, top and bottom, heel and sole, black leather and brown leather, more times than anyone could tell. None of the ladies in Cranford chose to sanction the marriage by congratulating either of the parties. We wished to ignore the whole affair until our liege lady, Mrs. Jameson, returned. Till she came back, to give us our cue, we felt that it would be better to consider the engagement in the same light as the Queen of Spain's legs, facts which certainly existed, but the less said about, the better. This restraint upon our tongues, for you see, if we did not speak about it to any of the parties concerned, how could we get answers to the questions we longed to ask, was beginning to be irksome, and our idea of the dignity of silence was paling before our curiosity, when another direction was given to our thoughts by an announcement on the part of the principal shopkeeper of Cranford, who ranged the trades from grocer and cheesemonger to man milliner as occasion required, that the spring fashions were arrived, and would be exhibited on the following Tuesday at his rooms in High Street. Now Miss Matty had been only waiting for this before buying herself a new silk gown. I had offered, it is true, to send to Drumble for patterns, but she had rejected my proposal, gently implying that she had not forgotten her disappointment about the sea-green turban. I was thankful that I was on the spot now to counteract the dazzling fascination of any yellow or scarlet silk. I must say a word or two here about myself. I have spoken of my father's old friendship for the Jenkins family. Indeed, I am not sure if there was not some distant relationship. He had willingly allowed me to remain all the winter at Cranford, in consideration of a letter which Miss Matty had written to him about the time of the panic, in which I suspect she had exaggerated my powers and my bravery as a defender of the house. But now that the days were longer and more cheerful, he was beginning to urge the necessity of my return, and I only delayed in a sort of odd forlorn hope that if I could obtain any clear information, I might make the account given by the Signora of the Aga Jenkins tally with that of poor Peter, his appearance and disappearance, which I had winnowed out of the conversation of Miss Pole and Mrs. Forrester. End of chapter 12.
All right, so Miss Mary Smith is hot on the trail of Mr. Peter Jenkins. And what a tempest in a teapot she stirred up by trying to get just a description of what he looked like. Oh, he had freckles. Oh, dear. Oh, dear, 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 dear. As a girl who grew up with freckles, that wasn't fun. Reading these old, nobody cared. Well, actually, that's not true. There were some girls in middle school who made comments, but really, honestly, nobody gave a ding dong. But because I read a lot of older books, and there were always conversations about, what girls would do to their face to try and get rid of the freckles, soak their skin with milk and things like that. Of course, I was traumatized that I had freckles, but I think I got over my bad self. But I did love that. Oh, that's just too bad that he might have freckles. I don't know if you caught the Hamlet reference at the very, very beginning of the chapter when Mary Smith says, was the poor Peter of Cranford the Aga Jenkins of Chandarababad, or was he not? As somebody says, that was the question. And of course, that's a to be or not to be. That is the question. As somebody said, that is the question. I think that's it. Like I said, this wasn't a big chapter with anything earth-shaking, but I felt like as social commentary, it was hilarious watching the rolling dog pile of crazy that was happening, starting with Miss Pole freaking out Miss Matty and Mary Smith. She got there before 12, and we know our rules. 12 o'clock is when you have to be dressed nice for the guests. This time, apparently, nobody cared that their caps had been mended and their collars were not the brightest white. So I just get such a kick out of these women. Last night was our book party for The Princess Bride. So last night we talked about William Goldman's book, the fact that the introduction is 100% made up, the S. Morgenstern 100% made up, and it's a very interesting book. And it's particularly interesting because of the movie, because looking at how William Goldman wrote the script for the movie, and he changed some important things. Some of it's just absolutely lifted, picked up, and the dialogue goes in. He's very good with dialogue. He did Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I think I didn't remember these. Marathon Man, Stepford Wives, All the President's Men. Oh, what was the Stephen King one with Kathy Bates? Misery. Those are all screenplays that he wrote. He's very, very good with dialogue. And so the dialogue in the book, much of it is lifted and put into the mouths of the actors in the movie. But there's kind of like Terry Pratchett, there's a lot of asides and there's a lot of parentheticals and kind of footnotes and things like that he sticks everywhere. He's a very parenthetically chatty author. Terry Pratchett's feels more like he's giving you the footnotes to make sure that you understand the context. He CraftLits his own books by giving you that information. William Goldman is more like sitting there and having a beer with him and him going, oh, and by the way, and then going off on a tangent and bringing it back around. Garrison Keillor, like he's constantly weaving present tense and story tense together, which, of course, they also do in the movie of The Princess Bride. That's where Peter Falk's character comes in. So July, our movie watch party night is going to be The Princess Bride. I am so excited. I love this movie and I love the book. And if you didn't go look for the kiss online or send away for the kiss as you are told to in the book itself, you should, because it's out there. And if you didn't read the book, you need to. And now you have a reason to. Go find out about that. I will tell you this. Andrew read this book in the early 80s before the movie came out. And he did write with a self-addressed stamped envelope to the publisher. And he did get the kiss text back in the mail. So I thought that was just awesome. Anyway, all right. You take care of yourself. Go listen to those podcasts, the Haptic and Hue and all the other podcasts on the women, the Scottish witches, the Tartans. Very, very cool. And also that book on the Porter sisters. Margaret said it was a fairly dense read. There is a lot there, but the two women in question really were quite remarkable and very interesting to read about. And then there's also the Benjamin Dreyer and Andrews, the links out to their conversations and John Stewart and Trevor Noah and Jameella Jamil and the utterly gutting story about what keeps happening to her when she is being interviewed by women. Makes me embarrassed to be a woman when women do that. So, okay, but everything else was really good. I want to end on a positive note. All the rest is great. And as is my tea, I have finished my tea while I've been recording the Bookshop Blend White. And talk to you soon. You take care of yourself. Next week, we start our next arc. We'll have more. Don't forget to send us your videos. Take care. Have a great one. Bye. You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.